Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the Menzies Research Centre, author of the best-selling book The Lucky Culture, and host of Battleground on ADH TV, Mr. Nick Cater.
Thank you so much. I don't know about this voice to Parliament idea, but I do like this voice to CPAC that comes from behind it. Laura Thomas, let's give her a big round of applause. She's been doing a fantastic job all day, unseen and uncelebrated back there. And look to all the team here at CPAC. This is a fantastic event. It is really outstanding, and I congratulate everybody involved in this. And also, look at this. I don't know if you can see that. That's me on streaming live right now. Would you believe, I mean, we think this room is big and it's full. Would you believe there have been 150,000 people watching this live stream? And how have they been watching that? They've been watching that on a digital TV channel which didn't even exist a year ago, ADH TV. Great crowd. Well, let's give them a big round of applause too. And look, we spend a lot of time, I'm as bad as anybody sitting there whinging about the ABC, but does anybody actually watch it anymore? I mean, do we? We've been liberated. We've been liberated. Funnily enough, it was the Rudd and Gillard government that liberated us from the ABC by producing this wonderful thing called broadband. It doesn't matter where you go in Australia these days. You can talk to farmers who are watching digital TV in their cabs or listening to podcasts all over the country. People are not watching or listening to the ABC. They're watching content like this. This is incidentally, this is also being streamed right now on Sky News Extra. It's also being streamed in the United States. So I don't know how many people we are getting through to today, but I'm nervous. I really am. But look, we need it, don't we? We need it. We need to get beyond the gatekeepers, because we've just heard Daniel Wild's shocking story about the fact that Facebook is now taking against anybody who dare have a debate even about the voice to Parliament. And this, Daniel pointed out, this is not happening in Australia, it's happening in Silicon Valley. They are deciding what you should hear and what you should not. So we need every means available to get beyond them, to talk beyond them, to talk to people like yourselves, like good people like yourselves around the country and around the world, to tell them what's really, really happening. Did anybody follow that story in the week about Jacinda Ardern in New York? She's come up with this idea that we need a global alliance, a global agreement, some sort of global censorship body, presumably, to stop misinformation on the internet, by which she means climate change deniers, so, and other things, no doubt, of that nature. You have to ask how we got there. New Zealand, up until a few years back, we'd thought of as a pretty free and democratic country. An idea like that we would have thought was just extraordinary and absurd. But we've got there. How? How did we get there? Well, this began, and Jacinda Ardern talks about it in her speech. It began with that dreadful incident in 2019 in Christchurch, the Christchurch massacre, when a crazed Muslim Islamic terrorist decided to go in and shoot people and stream it live on the net. And as a result of that, the New Zealand government introduced all sorts of measures to try and stop that happening, to try and censor that kind of radical, hateful content on the net, which we'd all have said at the time, I'm sure, well, we agree with that. We agree with that. But the trouble is, once you allow these things in, once you allow them to happen on the best intentions, on the best of grounds, there is also the danger, and I'd say perhaps even the certainty, that it will go even further. The definition of what is terrorism expands. The definition of what is bullying, what is dangerous, what is hurtful expands, as we've seen in almost every area, until it encompasses anything that the left doesn't like, anything that they want silenced. That's how we got there. That's how Jacinda Jacinda Ardern got there with this ridiculous and absurd and tyrannical proposal, which hopefully won't be taken up. But if we look at the recent past, the way things are going, there's a very good chance it will be, unless we fight back strongly. March the 16th, 2020, a press release is issued from the Premier's office in Victoria. It says that a 4-week state of emergency has been declared to flatten the curve, to enable them to get COVID under control. Just 4 weeks in which the Premier of Victoria will become all-powerful. He doesn't have to refer anything to Cabinet. He doesn't even have to talk to his party room. He certainly doesn't have to run things past Parliament. Just 4 weeks. That state of emergency is still in place and will be until October, when no doubt it will be renewed. The Health Minister in Victoria still has the power, if you're foolish enough to visit or live in that state, to tell you to wear a mask, to tell you to be vaccinated in some circumstances, to punish you if you don't. Those powers still exist. It's testimony to the fact that once we surrender these powers, once they're taken from us, it is very hard, if not impossible, to get them back. In 1919, Robert Menzies was then a student at the University of Melbourne. He'd lived through World War I, when, naturally, during a war, certain restrictions have been in place, certain freedoms have been removed. And he wrote an essay about this as a student, a prize-winning essay, which actually had contained far more wisdom and insight than has been shown by many adults in charge today. He said, of course, we surrender these freedoms in time of emergency. That is to be expected. But we must ensure they're given back. Because if they're allowed to persist, a terrible evil will have been perpetuated on humanity. Well, we hoped they would be removed, but they're very slow to be removed, and in states like South Australia, an incoming Labor government has taken what the Liberal government did in the cause of stopping this virus and amplified it, made it even more exaggerated, made the state even more powerful in these sort of emergencies. And then you get Jacinda Ardern's comments in the week. This too, I'm sure, comes from the fact that the left has been emboldened by what they've been able to achieve in COVID. Not ashamed as they should have been, not humbled, emboldened. And it comes through all over the place, doesn't it? This week we saw the ICAC laws, the draft ICAC laws presented to Parliament. Nobody wants corrupt politicians, of course not. But the powers that are being granted to what is essentially a kangaroo court to tap the phones of MPs, to raid public offices without a warrant, this is frankly scary, because we know where this leads. We know what happens. We know what happened in Victoria when they passed emergency laws and put Daniel Andrews in charge. We ended up with what I like to call a tyranny of incompetence. I mean, it's a bizarre thing about tyrannies. They're both incompetent and terrifying at the same time. And we had everything from the sinister to the silly. Let's start with the silly first, you know. People being told that they'd be arrested if they went to watch the sunset. You know, a bunch of kids up in Albury, I think, who were arrested for buying too much KFC because the police suspected they may be harbouring friends in their house to eat it. And then the sinister. And then the sinister. A woman, pregnant woman, arrested in her own home, in her pyjamas, marched off in handcuffs because of something she posted on Facebook. And the paramilitary-style police, far, far more terrifying than anything I've ever seen. The sound of the sirens alone reminded me of watching riots in Soweto as a kid on the TV news. It was terrifying. Nothing like that has ever happened in Australia before. And yet, there was seeming indifference from the general public. Having gone that way, of course, they advanced still further. Right now, of course, we're facing other threats to our doctors, the independence of our doctors. Laws going through the Victorian Parliament will shortly go through every state parliament in the country, which say that a doctor who does not offer advice that is the conventional wisdom of the medical profession will be struck off. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that it used to be that if the doctor said you got some terrible disease, you go and ask for a second opinion. You will no longer be entitled to ask for a second opinion, and a doctor can be struck off if he gives you one. That is where we are heading. And these things are going through parliaments. They're being debated with next to no, sometimes no debate in the newspapers alone. The mainstream media is something that I could go on for a long time on this topic, but geez, they disappointed us all, didn't they, during COVID? The so-called champions of the people, the champions of freedom that should have been standing up for us and our rights and saying no to these incredible restrictions that were put in place that were ruining people's lives, were ruining our kids' schooling. They should have been standing up, highlighting these things, but no, they just remained quiet and went along with it. Once again, it was left to independent media, and there's plenty of it, and good on them. I mean, I got into the habit during COVID, as I'm sure we all did, the first thing I'd look at in the day was independent media, not the mainstream media I've been looking at for the whole of my life. That's where it's going. That's where it's going. The voice to Parliament itself, which I mentioned at the top. Well, the voice to Parliament, what is it? It's not going to be elected. I mean, they've decided it's too hard to elect the voice to Parliament because it's very hard to pick out who could really genuinely show some connection with the Aboriginal people and who is merely ticking a box. They know that. It's too hard. So there will be no vote for that reason. And in any case, how could you vote for a voice to Parliament representing any group, as Jacinta Price pointed out earlier in the day? You know, are we to have a nation voice to Parliament to tell us what Penny Wong should think? Of course not. And right, Parliament now, there have been 15 Indigenous representatives in federal Parliament. 11 of them are in there now. And it ranges from everything from the great Jacinta Price to the man staring bonkers Lydia Thorpe, and in the middle, Jatty Lambie. You can imagine the voice, can't you? What can I say that represents all these viewpoints? It's absurd. As Jacinta says, it robs us of our humanity. It makes us all consider, perhaps we could have a voice to Parliament for craggy old ex-POMs, I don't know. But it's an absurd idea. So what will happen? Who will this voice be? It will inevitably be the voice of the woke establishment. It has to be, because they take all these things. So what do we do in the face of this? You're going to look for the redemptive message here, aren't you? And I've got to try very hard to give you one. A moment of hope, what we can do. Well, one thing we can do, I was as moved by anybody by Nigel Farage. Of course, our politicians are hopeless. But they're only human, and we have to stick with them. Because we have to, in the end, I believe, if we really want to change things, if we don't want to stand on the edge like Extinction Rebellion, screaming like idiots, actually changing things, actually making this a better country and in a better world for our children and our grandchildren, there are only two teams on the pitch. Everybody else is a spectator. That is the parliamentary democracy that's evolved here, and up to now, overall, has served us pretty damn well. So you've got to get with the team, you've got to back the team. And when you look at people who you've seen today, people like Amanda Stoker, people like Alex Antic, marvellous voice in Parliament, people like Matt Canavan, these are people that have spoken to you today and inspired us today, but their path has not been easy. They have had to show enormous courage to stand up for what they believe in Parliament, and they make a difference, believe me. Even if it's just a voice raised in the party room saying, no, we shouldn't do that. That's not true to our principles. They are important. So if you want to change the world, I just urge you to stick with the party, stick with a main party, because that is the only way you will actively be able to change policy in this country and therefore create a better future and a freer future for our children. That's my message today. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and the ADH TV commercial. You can watch me every Friday night at 8 o'clock on ADH TV. Thank you.